you need to reinvent yourself. Not change your business, not buy another business. No, no, no. Just reinvent yourself every 3 years. So if you're thinking about getting in business, don't do it unless you're willing to get uncomfortable and change course. So getting uncomfortable is the biggest thing about it. You have to be willing to get uncomfortable for an unknown, determined amount of time. If not, stick with your 9 to 5.
Hello and welcome to the Bar Business Podcast, where we help bar owners increase profits, attract loyal guests, and simplify operations so you can avoid burnout and finally enjoy your life outside of your bar. I'm your host, Chris Schneider, the Bar Business Coach. Before we get started, a quick thank you to our sponsors, Spot On, who provide a great modern POS solution for the bar and restaurant industry, and Starfish, who use AI to turn your books into actionable steps to increase profits. Today, I want to share with you another profile of someone who fell into the bar business in a way that's very unique, but quite relatable. And this is kind of building off some of the conversations we've had with other bar owners where they've not been hospitality people, fallen in the business, and done pretty well with it. Now, today, we have a guest who may have one of the most unique journeys I have ever heard. And essentially, he started a doggy daycare and ended up with a high-end bourbon bar. And there's a lot of stuff in between there, obviously, so we'll dig into all of that. But joining us today is Kelvin Abrams. He left working for the government in 2008 and ended up founding a doggy daycare. And then later he opened a coffee shop attached to his doggy daycare. And then that coffee shop morphed into a high-end bourbon bar. So kind of this crazy progression of things that for all of you listening, and I promise me the first time I heard this too, makes no sense at all. But Kelvin's here. He will break it down for us and explain it to us because he really does have a really cool journey, a lot of fun things that I think a lot of us can learn from. And then he is also the author of a book called Get Comfortable or Change Course, which we will dive into a little bit later in the show. So Kelvin, first of all, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Chris, for having me. I look forward to our conversation today.
I do too. And so to start with, because the way I set that up, right? Everybody's going, okay, you go from government employee to doggy daycare to coffee shop to bourbon. Like, what the heck is going on here? So lay out that journey for us. And let's go all the way back and start with, how'd you end up getting into the doggy daycare business in the first place?
Oh boy, that's a long story. So it's kind of a story, something that started in college. I went to school at Rutgers University in New Jersey, and I started working on this business plan and concept in college. And like most people, life got in the way outside of college. I went into investigations right outside of college, and I kind of put things to the side. And it wasn't really until I lost my dog Tiki, hence Tiki's Playhouse, I named my business after him, that I kind of wanted to take a different direction in life, just because of the fact that I wasn't happy doing the governmental work. I wasn't happy. It was too much of a 9 to 5. Actually, it really wasn't even a 9 to 5. I was basically on call all the time. I did a lot of traveling after 9/11, of course. And so I just wanted a change. And I just pulled my old business plan out of the closet when my dog died. And I just said, hey, this isn't for me. And I wanted to be my own business person. But I've always been an entrepreneur as a kid. I've always sold little toys. I've always been a hustler as a kid. So it was just a progression. It's just that I detoured a little bit. And then I just kind of came back to what I was born to do, which is to be an entrepreneur. And that's where Tiki's Playhouse came from. And then the coffee shop just came out of necessity. Honestly, it just came out of a necessity. It was my grooming area. I got tired of dealing with groomers. They were a pain in the neck to deal with. And I basically just said to myself, hey, what else could I put there in that space? It was 500 square feet, which is where I'm sitting at right here. And I decided to turn it into an organic coffee bar. And then from there, after the pandemic of 2019 or 20, whatever it was, we lost a lot of business. And then again, at that point, I said, hey, how can I yet again reinvent myself? So I reinvented myself yet again and came into a bourbon bar. So now we are a high-end bourbon bar. We have over 119 different bourbons / whiskey, and we're continuing to grow. My goal is to get to 250.
That's a lot.
Yeah,
but so
in this small little place. I don't know where I'm going to put it, but let me tell you, I enjoy tasting each and every bottle.
Well, I'm sure you do, right? I mean, that is one of the fun things about this. And that's one of the, I think, appeals for a lot of people when we start talking about things like high-end bourbon bars. It's like, I like bourbon. I get to go buy all this stuff that's allocated that I can't otherwise get access to and drink it.
Exactly. Yep.
So really what this story is, it's a story of a lot of pivots, right? Because you take a groom shop, you change it into a coffee shop, COVID hits, you lose business, you say, okay, let's pivot into being a bar. Those two pivots, obviously, if you had the business plan for the doggy daycare from when you were younger, okay, that's an obvious kind of pivot. But what made you go, okay, groomers are not easy to manage. So I want to manage a bunch of baristas that are probably just as hard to manage. Well, how did that first pivot from groomers to coffee shop?
Well, luckily, Chris, I'm the only barista I have to manage.
Well, that helps.
So some days I like my boss, some days I don't like my boss. So I think it was just, I'm a guy of opportunity, and it's like I'm a very creative guy. And, when I wake up in the middle of the night and I'm like, oh man, something comes to me, I start working on it. I don't let it
Mhm,
sit too long. And that's kind of how it came about. What I did was I kind of looked at the time and said, hey, what's the hottest thing out there? Doggy daycare at the time, or dog business, I should say, was like a $56 billion industry,
mhm,
something to that effect. And then I said, what's the next biggest commodity out there? And next to oil, it was coffee.
mhm,
And so being a non-coffee drinker, people laugh at me, say, how do you have a coffee bar? You don't drink coffee. And I'm like, well, it's called money. It's called creativity. It's called demand. And so out here, I looked and I said, there's no organic gourmet coffee shop where I'm located right here. And we're in one of the richest zip codes in Maryland. And so I just kind of put two and two together and said, hey, I have a dog business right next door, $56 billion industry. Coffee at that time was the second highest traded commodity on the stock market. So
mhm.
I'm like, hey, put the two of them together. Why not do something like that? And that's where K9 and Coffee came from, is we wanted to just marry the two businesses together.
A really big point in there that you kind of glossed over, but is huge, which is you picked what you're selling not because you drink it or like it. Now, obviously, with the bourbon, that's a little different, and we'll get into that in a second.
Different.
But on the coffee, you picked it because it was what the market needed,
Yes.
right? And so often, I feel like for people when they get into this industry, whether it's anything in hospitality, coffee shop, or bar, a lot of folks want to come from a point of here's what I want, here's what I would like, not here's what the market needs, here's what sells.
Exactly.
And your approach, obviously, yeah, you're producing a product you don't actually drink, but at the same time, you're producing a product that can put more money in your pocket.
Yes. And that's also goes along with the line as to why I decided to go towards a high-end bourbon bar, not
Mhm,
just a bourbon bar, and or not just a bar. I decided to focus on bourbon slash whiskey because of the fact that this area can bear it. We're in a good area. We're in an area where people love bourbon out here. And again, the high-end bourbon out here, where I'm located, it's appropriate. I wouldn't do
mhm.
something like this in an inner city area somewhere. I'd focus on what the demand is for that area. And out here, the demand, or I should say, my bourbon bar fits right in with what's happening out here. And then also, when you throw the dogs involved with it, and dogs and coffee, they can go in my backyard here and socialize. I mean, that's just a no brainer.
And so when you made that pivot to bourbon, right? So you were doing the coffee, you pivot to bourbon. Bourbon is obviously something you like a lot more, and whiskey, and you get a lot more enjoyment out of bringing in these really cool products and being able to drink them.
I do.
But I'm sure there's some things that in that process really surprised you. Because I know that, a dog daycare business is way different than a bar. A coffee shop is different than a bar in and of itself. So each of these transition points, I'm assuming you had some major surprises.
Boy, did
S
I.
so let's start with just when you first got into hospitality, getting into just doing the coffee and stuff. What surprised you there?
Food loss. I mean, that's the biggest thing. I mean, you can say, hey, I have muffins, biscotti, bagels, things like that. And you think everyone's going to come in and buy it. But, you may have the wrong muffin. They may
Mhm,
prefer blueberry muffins versus banana muffins, whole grain muffins versus wheat muffins, or bagels, everything bagels versus, egg bagels or what have you. And so you have a lot of food waste, so you go through a period, man. I mean, gosh, when I first opened a coffee shop, man, I was throwing away a lot of stuff just because you just don't know your market. And that was part of my fault because I've never been in this type of a hospitality field before. And it's like the biggest thing is cost, food costs and waste. And it's like, unfortunately, I bought in abundance where it's like, no, you need to buy smaller. Even if you pay higher, buy smaller until you find out what your niche is and then go bigger. Same thing with the bar is I started off, charging one price with the alcohol, but quickly realizing that it wasn't working because every single thing in the bar you have to count for that people take advantage of. Like, for example, the straws, the
Mm-hmm.
napkins, the coasters, the bathroom toilet paper, the towels that they wipe their hands on, everything you have to account for in a bar, the ice, the cups, the detergent, all these
Mm-hmm.
things that people sit back and take advantage or, not understand, I should say, not take advantage of, but not understand when they go into a bar or when they go into a restaurant and they complain about the high prices. And let me tell you, Chris, it's an eye opener. I will never complain about going into a bar or a restaurant again because now I see the back end of it.
Mm-hmm.
And restaurants and bars, it takes years before they actually start making money.
And I think to your point that initial process when you start out with any concept in hospitality of here's what I think I need to offer, but here's what's selling and dialing that in and all the waste you get in that process is huge.
It's
To your point.
huge. And just like with alcohol, I mean, that's why I not only did I go towards a higher end bourbon bar because I like it slash whiskey, but then also I said, hey, Kelvin, you started out with 10 different beer selections. Well, guess what? Beer has an expiration date on it.
Mhm.
You started out with 6 or 7 different wines. Guess what? Wine doesn't expire, but guess what? People's taste in wines change from season to
Mhm.
season. So you have a winter wine, Cabernet. You have a spring wine, you have a rose, so you really
Yeah.
have to be in tune with the wine industry, which I'm not. And so what I said was, okay, let's switch over to something that shelf life is a lot longer, something that I can play with. And so now what I focus on more is what I like to refer to as old school drinks, like your speakeasy kind of drinks, your
Mhm.
basic, your Manhattans, your old fashions, your martinis, things that can be sustainable for a long period of time where I don't have to worry about getting a whole bunch of garnishes, a whole bunch of mixes and purees and all of these things. They expire, they have an expiration date.
Well, and not only do they expire, but they had I mean, to your point, it's one of those hidden costs that people don't think about, right? Because you go, "Okay, well, I have a Jack and Coke. Coke is basically free. I know what Jack costs. If I multiply it by if I take the cost of Jack, multiply it by 4, I'm not losing money." True.
Correct.
But you start adding mixers, you start adding garnishes, right? I mean, and even in something like a Manhattan, the thing that always gets me is the Luxardo cherries. I don't know if you guys use
Ooh,
Luxardo cherries.
$20 a jar.
Right. Like 30 cents a frickin' cherry. And then
Right.
and then some customer goes, "Well, can I have an extra cherry?" And I wanna be
Yes.
like, "Yeah, give me $2 and I'll give you a cherry," right?
That happens to me all the time. But see, what are you going to do? You can't say, no, give me $2. You have to do what? Eat that cost.
Right.
And you satisfy that customer, you give them that extra cherry. But that's why you have your prices set at where they are, because
Mhm.
some may be a profit, some may be a loss, and it evens itself out.
Yeah, and I think that's, for a lot of people getting in the business, especially people like you that are coming from other industries, that's one of the biggest things. And I'm right there with you that it's really hard it's really easy to complain about what you pay at bars and restaurants, but then once you realize the math on the back end, it's really hard to complain. So with bourbon, so one of the things that I want to dig into a little bit is your bourbon selection and how you've kind of developed this over time. Because I'm sure you said you have what now about 120,
119.
118? Okay. And I'm sure you did not start with 118. You probably started with like 5.
I probably started with about 20 or
Okay.
25 to start with.
So
Still
started
about
with a
20.
good number, but you're over 5 times that amount now. And sounds like I don't know exactly the date that the bar opened and you started doing bourbon, but post COVID. So we're talking about 4 years. So you started with about 25 bourbons and then have added 20, 25 a year every year, more or less. How have you decided what to add and how have you grown that selection over time in a way that has worked on your data and not just picking random things that your supplier wants to sell to you?
Oh, good question. I mean, because sales rep come in the door and sell you anything, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Greatest thing next to sliced bread. So I've learned from my customers, be honest with you. So I
Mhm.
listen to the customers coming in the door, and when they make a suggestion, I write it down and I research it. I look it up on Google. I also get several whiskey magazines here, and I look at what's popular, what's good. I look at local whiskey slash bourbons. There's a favorite whiskey that I'm really big into, Uncle Nearest. Uncle Nearest is a great whiskey. There's a story behind it. It's an African American whiskey, and there's a story behind it. The guy, Nathan Nearest Green, taught Jack Daniels how to do whiskey. And so, a lot of my whiskey and a lot of the bourbons that I have here, means something to me. And Uncle Nearest is one that's really near and dear to my heart. I even purchased a barrel from Uncle Nearest just because I love the company, love the story, love the whiskey. And other whiskeys, the same thing. I got a whole handful of whiskeys that I really love. And I'm really trying to focus on local whiskeys. Like we just started carrying Mike Rowe Noble whiskey, which is named after his grandfather. And everybody knows Mike Rowe from Dirtiest Jobs or his voice from Deadliest Catch. So
Mhm.
he's here from Dundalk, Maryland. So I started carrying his whiskey. And there's another local Patapsco distillery whiskey that we're carrying. So it's just a whole bunch of different things kind of come into my collection. But mainly a lot of the allocated products I get just because the clientele asks for it. And that requires, as you already know, to get an allocated product, you have to push so many other products to get that one bottle. And so that's where the inventory comes in. And that's where the problem comes in with the money sitting on all this inventory for that one bottle. So therefore, you have to compensate for the inventory. Guess what? On the price of that drink in that bottle.
Mhm.
So these are things that I'm learning.
Yeah, and so one of the things that's real interesting in what you said there is so you're picking things based on what your customers like and also on what has a good story.
Yes.
And so and I agree with you, stories are very important, right? Being able to tell a story to your guests makes everything better.
Yes.
But is there anything particular? Because every bourbon out there, every whiskey out there, every distillery, every business, right, is going to have their own story, but some stories are better than others, right?
Yeah.
So is there anything that you look for when you're bringing something in to say, "Okay, this is a story that I know I can sell to my customer?"
Yeah, actually, if it resonates with me, if I like the story that the owners bring, for example, if a woman-owned distillery, I love that story. African American distillery, love that story. A small local distillery, love that story. Some of the bigger distilleries that people know, your Sazerac, everybody knows Sazerac.
Right.
You get your Blanton's, your Eagle Rare, and all of that stuff. They've been around for decades, and it's like great whiskey, great bourbon, but at the same time, it's like, hey, give someone else a chance to get into the market. Give another small company that may not be as well known as this company but has a great story and a great bourbon slash whiskey. So that's also what resonates to me is the little guy. Give the little guy an opportunity. These big people hold a monopoly in the whiskey and the bourbon business. And
Mhm.
again, that's why I go back to Uncle Nearest. I love Uncle Nearest's story. It's an African American owned company. They started 7 years ago. It's $1 billion company. They're in every United States. They're in all the states. I should say they're in all the United States. I think 49 different countries. They've won 900 something awards and it's all African American owned. So it's like stories like that I love.
Mhm.
And they're unforgotten stories. I mean, it's like no one would know who Uncle Nearest was if it wasn't for Fawn Weaver telling everybody the story that Uncle Nearest taught Jack Daniels how to do whiskey. And they were friends. Until to this day, their family in Lynchburg, Tennessee are very close-knit family. So that's the kind of story that I like. And the Mike Rowe from Dundalk, Maryland here. I'm in Maryland. So
Mhm.
Dundalk, Maryland, Mike Rowe, his family still lives here. Love watching Mike Rowe shows and the dirtiest jobs. Love the guy. He's got so much character.
Mhm.
So it's just, I love stuff like that. And then to go on, there's another bourbon here, Four Branches. There's a guy here in Maryland, local. It's called Four Branches. For four military guys, special forces came out with this branch bourbon, and it's called Four Branches, dedicated to the four branches, and all of them are special forces. So I love stories like that. And we're going to try to
Mhm.
get him in here to sign some of his bottles. And again, I think Four Branches is a beautiful bourbon. It's awesome, but it's just not recognized like Sazerac or Blanton's or Buffalo Trace. And
Right.
that's also part of my story is I want to give the little guy an opportunity just like me.
Well, and I think that's wonderful, and one thing that I like about the way you presented all of this is you said, you have the big guys, right? You haven't said, "I'm just gonna have the little stuff nobody knows." Because I feel like that's a trap that a lot of people get into when they first get into this business or even people established in this business. They go, "I want everything to have a good story. I want all these little companies." Then people come in and they try to order a Jack, and you're like, "Well, I don't have Jack Daniels." And they go, "What? That's weird." Right? So you have that. You have all the big brand name stuff for the people that come in and call for it. But you also have all these wonderful smaller companies where you can tell those stories and expose people to things that they wouldn't otherwise get the opportunity to try.
Exactly. And I think the reason why I levitate towards these smaller companies is it gives me an opportunity to tell a story.
Hmm.
When you tell a story, you're engaging with your customers, and engaging with your customers does two things. A, it keeps them there buying another drink,
Hmm.
money. And number two, it allows them to tell that story to another friend and to bring that friend here to the bar so they can hear the story from you. And if you're passionate about it, like I'm passionate about Uncle Nearest, I'll sit and talk about Uncle Nearest all day long. I'll share them samples of my barrel from Uncle Nearest.
Hmm.
I'll tell them the story about it. I've read the books, Fawn Weaver's book. So when you're passionate about it, I think that'll draw more people in the door. That's why I just can't wait to get 4 branches in here, because the guy literally is right. One of the owners is literally right around the corner. He drives past my yard here just about twice a week whenever he's in town. So I can't wait to bring that guy in here and
Hmm.
really help him out, and to help me out as well by bringing people in and sharing their military experience, number one, and then also sharing their bourbon as to why they created 4 branches.
And that's wonderful because it's when you can combine that community and different groups and tell those stories, you can do great things. Now, one thing you mentioned there that I want to dive into a little bit is samples. Because part of telling all these stories then becomes sampling the actual whiskey, right? And so often, especially somebody in your case where you have almost 120 different bourbons and whiskeys, some of those are, I know from talking to you, very expensive and not things that you necessarily want to just pour and let everybody in the bar taste because you'd be broke if you did that. So, how do you handle samples when you have that many bourbons and it is so easy for someone to come in and just sample you to death?
So I have this rule inside my big head here, right? No more than 3 samples. And then there's top shelf samples that are just not available. Now, the only time someone would get a top shelf sample is if they're drinking a top shelf bourbon slash
Hmm.
whiskey. Then I will allow them to get a top shelf sample. But the normal Joe Blow coming in the door, I have about 6 or 7 go tos that I go to, and they're most small bourbon companies or whiskey companies, one of them being Uncle Nearest, that I go to and I say, hey, or sample these, and I allow them to sample it. But I only go to about 3, and then that's it. Because again, unfortunately, in the alcohol business, every ounce matters.
Hmm.
And not only that, people will take advantage of you because they say, hey, you got plenty of alcohol. What's a half ounce? But they don't realize a half ounce here, a half ounce there. And at the end of the night, you're giving away 8 ounces. 8 ounces is profitable. That's profit you're
Hmm.
losing with 8 ounces that they don't understand. And then when they go to the bathroom and use that toilet paper and use that soap to wipe their hands and the paper towels, they don't realize that you just took money away from my janitorial supplies. So
Right?
everything matters here. It really does. Even bug
Absolutely.
spray out in the yard when I'm spraying the dandelions and the weeds, all that stuff matters.
Well, and that's important, right? Because that really is true. It's every single penny you spend
It matters.
matters. And and I think because I know you're in this business, you got the doggy daycare, and we should also mention I know you have a gym across the street as well.
Correct.
And I think it's probably a fair assumption on my point, and tell me if I'm wrong on this, but the bar is probably your lowest margin activity.
Correct.
And so you have the lowest margins, some of the most difficult customer situations, I'm sure.
Sometimes.
And some of the I mean, I'm sure dogs can be stressful. I'm sure gyms can be stressful, but I know for a fact bars and drunk people are always stressful. So so you have the lowest margin, the most stress, the out of all your businesses, would you say the bar is the hardest?
The bar is 10 times harder than all the other. I would rather have 4 gyms, 4 doggy daycares than 1 bar. Let me tell you, it's tough. I mean, the hours, the cost, the inventory, the loss. I mean, oh my God, every single dime matters in a bar.
And it really does. So let me ask you this question. Is it worth it?
Yes and no. Yes, it's worth it because I love supporting my small community here and I love offering something new and unique to my small community. Is it worth it? Not when you have 3 other businesses and you're trying to run a bar. Being the first time in this type of a hospitality industry, yeah, it's kind of not worth it. If I didn't have all the other businesses and the book that I wrote and I'm doing podcasts and interviews for the book, then yeah, it would be worth it because I'd have 120% of my time
Mhm.
to donate. But right now, I might be able to only donate 50% of my time to the bar, which is I'm doing an injustice to the bar, to myself, and actually to my community as well.
So it is the hardest, and what's funny is if you asked me, is it worth it to get in the bar business? My answer would probably be the same. It's a fun business. It's a great business. It's rewarding. You get to meet all these people. You get to tell all these stories. There are absolutely wonderful things about it. But if your goal is to own a business to make money, yeah, I'm not sure it's your best option.
No. There are other businesses you can make that you don't have to worry about. And not only that, there's a lot of legal stuff with bars that you
Mhm.
already know, over serving people, underage, it's a lot of legal stuff, and then drinking behind the bar. I mean, thank goodness I'm the only bartender here. And I think I'm going to keep it that way because I have expensive stuff on the shelf and I use a jigger every single time I pour
Mhm.
just because of the fact that, as we know, every ounce matters and free pouring allows you to pour 2.5 or 3 ounces when it should only be 2 ounces of that particular bourbon. So that's difficult as well too, is just managing the inventory and pouring and all of that stuff. So I'll probably be the only bartender down here unless I can find an adult that has been in the industry that understands the importance of every ounce.
Absolutely. And that's not always the easiest thing to find, right? Employees in hospitality can be very difficult for sure.
And
So
then drinking behind the bar, forget about it. A lot of
Mhm.
times people say, "Hey, let's do a shot together." And I'm like, "No, I can't." They just don't understand the importance of that. It's not because I don't want to drink the alcohol that someone's buying me. No, it's I have to be cognitive and aware of what's going on around me so I don't overserve somebody, send someone out the road driving that may kill themselves, kill someone else. And now I'm in a whole host of trouble and I may lose my alcohol license, so it's just not worth it.
Absolutely.
So I just don't drink. I mean, sometimes when I drink, it's a half hour before I close, and I'm just having a sip of bourbon or something like that with the client that's in the door. But being drunk behind the bar and taking shots behind the bar, absolutely not. That's a no go.
When I couldn't agree with you more on that one. I never drank in my bar, and people would always ask me why, and my answer would be because I don't want you to actually know what I think about you and everyone else in this bar. Because if I drink, I'm gonna tell you all what I think, and then I'm not gonna have any business anymore,
Guess the truth comes out when you're drinking, right?
right? I just don't need that.
Right.
And on the liability aspect, it's true, and I agree with you. A drink at the end of the night when you're closing up or when you have, a couple customers there and it's all wrapping, okay, whatever. But early in the day, absolutely not.
Absolutely not. No.
So we're getting a little tight on time here, but real quick, let's talk about your book for a minute. Tell me a little bit about the book and what you've done in the book.
Okay. Thank you for allowing me to talk about my book. The book is called Get Uncomfortable or Change Course: Understanding What It Takes to Be an Entrepreneur. And the book is something that I had in my head since the age of 18. I wanted to write a book about my life and things that I've gone through. It's like I had a challenging growing up and challenging in a time in college and after college, et cetera, et cetera. And so I just kind of wanted to share my story and I just didn't know what I was going to talk about. And it wasn't until the pandemic that I actually really knew what I was going to talk about. So this book has been 20 years in the making. And the book is about helping other entrepreneurs prevent them from doing the things that I did, like spending a lot of money in marketing when you first get started. Oh my God. Employees when you first get started, dealing with employees, and even back to the basics, which is how to start a business with no money. I mean, I literally started my business with $15,000, and that was less than the 20% that I needed to come to the bank table with. But it just talks about how to start the business, how to do a business plan, what you really need. And that book spun off to an online course, same thing. It's called Get Uncomfortable or Change Course. And it's an online course and it goes a little bit further into talking about what the banks require, what the
Mhm.
banks need, your credit score, well, where you need to be, things like that. So I just wanted to give back. And one of my mantras in the book is learn, earn, return. So I've learned, I'm earning, and I think it's time for me to return to give back. I wouldn't be here 17 years later as an entrepreneur or business owner if I didn't have people in my corner helping me and supporting me over the years. And so I like to just say, this is my time now to give back and to help others.
I love that. And I love the title. Again, it's Get Uncomfortable or Change Course, just because that really is what business is, right? If you get comfortable, it's time to pivot. It's time to change something.
Absolutely. Chris, let me tell you, I've had 3 or 4 millionaires that were clients here, multiple businesses. In fact, one guy had 45 Pizza Huts in the state of Maryland here tell me, And they all told me the same thing, which is every 3 years, you need to reinvent yourself. Not change your business, not buy another business. No, no, no. Just reinvent yourself every 3 years so you don't become stagnant. And a great story I'd love to tell, and it's in my book, and I always joke around and I say, Mike Tyson, if you're listening, don't come after me. But a great story is Mike Tyson, the former champ of the world, right? Nobody could beat him. He was a beast. I mean, he was fearful and just knocking people out in 10 seconds. Along came a guy named Buster Douglas. He had nothing to lose. I like to say humbly, Mike Tyson, you got comfortable. And that's an example of what happens when you get comfortable. Buster Douglas was nowhere near on the same level as Mike Tyson. No offense to you, Buster Douglas, but nowhere near his level. But he got comfortable, and guess what? He lost. And that's what happens in business. If you get comfortable, you lose.
Absolutely. And that is perfectly said. So with that, because we really are running out of time at this point, is there anything else you would like to add before we take off for the day?
I usually like to tell people, if you're thinking about getting in business, don't. So on that note,
that's good advice.
If you're thinking about getting in business, don't do it unless you're willing to get uncomfortable and change course. So getting uncomfortable is the biggest thing about it. You have to be willing to get uncomfortable for an unknown, determined amount of time. If not, stick with your 9 to 5.
That is fantastic advice. So people have listened to you. They're saying, okay, Kelvin seems like a cool dude. I want to learn more about him. I want to go grab this book. I want to check out his bar. Maybe they live in Maryland and have a dog. How can they get in touch with you? How can people find out more about you, your book, and your business?
Thank you. I have a website, kelvinabrams.com. That's spelled Kelvin, Abrams, Abrams.com. K9andcoffee.com will lead you to my bar. Tiki's Playhouse will lead you to my doggy daycare. So Kelvin Abrams. And if you just Google Kelvin Abrams, I'm all over Google, so you'll be able to find me somewhere.
Perfect. And as always, if you're listening, scroll down. We'll have all those links in the show notes for you so you can get right over to Kelvin's stuff. With that, Kelvin, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate this conversation. Had a lot of fun. And just look forward to talking to you more in the future as you continue this journey, man.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
That about wraps it up for today. If you enjoyed today's insights, make sure you like, subscribe, and leave a review. If you are ready to take your bar to the next level, schedule a strategy session with me by clicking the link in the show notes below. Until next time, have a great day, and we will talk again later.